Let's talk about what serum ferritin means to the general public right now and to the medical community. So serum ferritin is the current industry standard for a snapshot of your body's iron status. So if you've ever gotten a blood test done and gotten your serum ferritin levels back, usually when you get your level, it will also be accompanied by an acceptable level, right? We want to fall within a certain range. The range for serum ferritin is a relatively large range, anywhere from 30 to 300 nanograms per deciliter. And the way we see it now, if your ferritin is high, ferritin is a iron binding, iron neutralizing protein, typically reserved for storing iron. Again, we'll expand on that later. But if you have a lot of ferritin, which is meant to store iron, in your blood, that means that you have a lot of iron. If you do not have a lot of ferritin in your blood, that means you do not have a lot of iron. And so that's kind of the logic we've been using. We've been using ferritin as that gauge of what our iron status is. So the beginning signs of hemochromatosis, which is hereditary iron overload. If your ferritin levels are over 500, that's when people start to care about what your iron status is. They'll put you on chelation therapy. They'll recommend phlebotomy or donating blood. Low ferritin, is typically anything less than 15. If you're less than 15, chances are you're experiencing symptoms of anemia, which is mostly fatigue is usually the main one. And they will begin to supplement iron. So if you're low on iron, the logic goes, well, if you're low, we've got to give you more. It's not now. Serum ferritin isn't the only metric being used. Serum iron is the other most common measure of iron status. Serum iron is measuring how much iron is bound to transferrin in your blood. Now, if this all is brand new to you, I've talked about this before in earlier episodes of the podcast. There are 4 major iron chaperone proteins. This is not a comprehensive list. These are the ones that people are talking about the most. So, for starters, the prefix fer, F-E-R or F-E-R-R, is related to iron. Okay, so if you see F-E-R, ferritin, anything fer, that has to do with iron. So ferritin, iron in, storage inside the cell. That's typically what ferritin is meant for. It is an intracellular protein responsible for packaging iron and saving it for later, or making sure it's neutralized within the cell. Transferrin, transport iron, transfer, means it's basically a taxi for iron throughout the body. Transferrin is the go-to transporter responsible for getting iron other places outside of the cell. So it moves iron throughout the body. Ferroportin, portal for iron. This is a transmembrane protein, right? So it spans the membrane of cells and allows iron to move in and out, right? It's a gateway. Hepcidin is the master iron regulator protein, okay? So this is the protein calling the shots from within the cell. It's responsible for orchestrating changes in cellular iron load. So it has a direct impact on the amount of ferroportin in the cell, in times of inflammation, in times of iron deficiency. Hepcidin is the one calling the shots, making sure that the cell has enough iron and that the iron is being transported appropriately once it's been absorbed or if it needs to be mobilized. Now, what most people don't know is that transferrin is, by and large, the number one preferred chaperone protein for transporting iron. people see serum ferritin, they associate it with, oh, you know, if it's high, if ferritin's high, iron's high. If it's low, iron's low. They think that ferritin is a transport protein, and that it is able to, but that's not its main job. Transferin's job is to do that. Now, another confusing aspect of that is that transferrin doesn't technically hold as much per molecule as ferritin. Ferritin can hold a lot of iron, like thousands of molecules of iron. Transferrin can only handle 2. However, the volume of transferrin is significantly high. So what it does not have in the quality of iron holding, it makes up for in quantity. It is also more magnetic in terms of having a higher affinity and a preferred binding for any free iron that is circulating in the blood. And there are some ties to transferrin levels and disease states or states of inflammation. Now, there is some ambiguity in all of this. There are situations where this isn't true all the time. That's why I said typically with these, but in states of iron deficiency, where there is not enough iron, transferrin will increase, which makes sense because think of it like a taxi in a city, right? If you are walking through the city and you know there's like taxi drivers looking to drive people someplace, you know, like business isn't good, and they've got, you know, we've got a lot of feet on the ground wanting to kind of mobilize people and get people moving. Now, in a decreased or in a disease state, there is less transferrin in states of overload because, and this may be a little counterintuitive at face value, in states of iron overload, all of the iron is being locked inside the cell. So there are fewer people in the city, right? Less people. If there are just, you know, fewer people in the city, a less populated city, the number of taxis present is going to be significantly lower, right? So in those states of disease where iron is being stowed away, less transferrin. So now let's talk about how serum ferritin came to be the accepted metric for iron load, okay? And it really, you know, there really isn't this really long story to this. I'll try to keep this brief, but this is like there's like 1 or 2 papers of this group of researchers who were responsible for, or who were interested in finding the ties between, you know, finding a good metric for iron load, right? How can we tell if someone is high or low in iron? They happened upon ferritin. So this 1972 paper, Ferritin in the Serum of Normal Subjects in Patients with Iron Deficiency and Iron Overload. This paper found a correlation of serum ferritin levels with iron disorders. Okay, the 2 main iron disorders are iron deficient anemia, which is too little iron, and hereditary hemochromatosis, which is too much. So they took a big group of people, those with anemia, those with no documented iron disorders, and those with hereditary hemochromatosis. And they took everyone's serum ferritin levels and found that those that had anemia had low ferritin. They found that those that had iron overload had high ferritin. And then those that had no documented iron disorder was anywhere in between. Okay. And that's basically it. That's kind of like the test that set in motion the accepted standards of, you know, what our iron load is. They did do a follow-up paper 3 years later, where they were like, yep, looks like serum ferritin is useful and a convenient method of assessing iron storage based on our understanding of hemochromatosis, anemia, you know, they didn't really do any more diving into the exact role of ferritin in each of those diseases. It was just kind of a convenient correlation, and so it was accepted. Now, since then, and this is one of the things that really like blew my mind, we still, in the year 2024 now, in the year 2024, there is still a lot of ambiguity on exactly how ferritin works and the breadth of how extensive its influences are. We know very little about ferritin still. So there has been research on it, none of it particularly conclusive. So there have been discrepancies in the form and function of serum ferritin versus cellular ferritin, right? Like we mentioned before, ferritin is meant to be inside the cell. The characteristics of what's inside the cell and what's circulating in the serum are different. They've also found a relationship with inflammatory status and how those experiencing chronic inflammation, the role of ferritin is changing. And they're still unsure if ferritin is coming upstream of that inflammation and causing it, or if it's downstream and that the inflammation is influencing how the ferritin is being used. Now, it's still inconclusive as to how ferritin gets out of the cell, right? It's supposed to be inside. How is it getting outside? Not sure. Still not sure. And then, like I mentioned before, we really don't understand how extensive the impacts of ferritin are in cell physiology, our immune response, DNA replication. Iron is an important molecule. We don't know anything about the chaperones that are making sure that iron gets to where it's supposed to go.